Hi boys and girls, it's me Butch. My name is Terry David Silvercloud. I'm 73 years old. I live in Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. Today is Saturday the 19th of May. Harry and Megan got married today. It's been a mix of sun and clouds here in Vancouver. So I'm old and I know it, and I have severe joint problems and live in chronic pain, but I try to keep busy because I live alone. Got to keep myself amused somehow. So I try to paint in my old age, trying to be an artist. And I'm a photographer and I'm into theoretical physics. So in my bid to be useful, I make videos. And also, being an artist, I'm one big art project. I'm just trying to be creative 24/7. So today I'm talking about free energy, or the concept of free energy. Nothing is free. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. Life is hard. Nothing's free. So why do people get that concept? I would say, as a physicist, as a scientist myself, that they just aren't knowledgeable of a whole lot of things we already know in the world of physics, which is a branch of science. Science means knowledge or knowing, and if you don't know, you're ignorant. It means you're ignorant of something. Doesn't mean you're stupid, it just means you don't know something or other. So it kind of comes out of ignorance of things that we already know, and superstitions and belief in magic. So I just want to give you some examples of why energy is never free and where energy comes from. I meander a bit because I'm a bit ADHD. Energy is the ability to do work. So anything that can do work is energy when it comes down to physics. And energy comes in different forms, and moving energy is called kinetic energy, and you can find that in the wind. So you can use the kinetic energy of the wind's on the move, to turn windmills, and you can do the same thing in water, for water to turn water mills. And you can use gravity as well. If you know that the water supply, because it's kinetic, it's always moving, isn't going to suddenly go dry on you if you decide to stick a dam there. That may or may not be good news, depending on what you're trying to do, but you'd like to be able to maybe slap a bit of a retaining wall there, particularly if the water makes any kind of a drop, and it wouldn't have to be a very big drop to become useful quite right away, because not only would you be taking advantage of being able to turn a wheel by the fact that the water is running already, but you'd have the weight of the water falling on your wheel as well. And we do that all the time in hydroelectric dams, places like Hoover Dam, Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls was one of the very first really big tests of alternating current, and nobody was really sure right up to the moment they flipped the switch whether it was all going to work, because this was all very new technology on a rather gigantic scale, and designed by a guy named Tesla, who got screwed by Westinghouse, who built Niagara Falls. But Tesla was on to the idea that direct current, although it was quite powerful, wasn't always necessary, and he gave us the first concept of alternating current. So now we know that almost everything likes to alternate when it comes to electrics, and the people that don't know about free energy are not conversant with the idea of electromagnetic waves, and they come in all frequencies, which is the distances between waves, and wavelengths, which is how long one individual wave might be. And we use certain wavelengths between about 400 and 800 nanometers. A nanometer is 1/billionth of a meter. So we use those electromagnetic waves to hit the rods and cones of the antennae which are in our eye, which are conveniently just about exactly the same length. And the reason they are that length and built the way they are is so that they will resonate with any particular wavelengths within that very narrow particular band of electromagnetic energy. House current is very, 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 very long waves. Each wave is about 5,000 meters long. And the reason we use long waves for things like house current, whether it's, well, there are no waves in direct current, but in alternating current, the reason we use long waves is longest is strongest. A tsunami is destructive not because it's so high, but it just never stops running. It's like the ocean suddenly becomes a river. It just doesn't, it may only be 5 or 10 feet high, but if it's moving at 5 to 10 or 15 miles per hour, that's a lot of water moving, and suddenly you're in a river. So longest is strongest. So free energy, you may say the water in the river is free, but it's not free. Somebody has to do the work of capturing the energy and then distributing it. And the idea of taking energy right out of the air, like Tesla was thinking, he just didn't get the grasp yet of radio. At the time he cottoned on to alternating currents, he wasn't quite grasping that he had invented radio waves. He just hadn't sorted it out. Marconi, sharp young lad that he was, cottoned on that real fast and gave us our first radio. He just picked a particular, very convenient set of frequencies, which we would now call radio waves. Just a nice, convenient set of wavelengths that are long enough to be strong and short enough to be able to be captured. To capture an electromagnetic wave, you need an antenna. And an antenna can be almost any piece of metal, any piece of conducting metal, and it's best that it be straight, and it's best that it be aligned at right angles to frequency modulated waves and in line with amplitude modulated waves. If you're trying to, there's different ways you can modulate radio waves, and but it's important that this entire wire electronically vibrates with a particular electromagnetic wave that you're trying to capture, which is the radio wave. And with television waves, they're much shorter frequency, but even, and I'm from the days of channel 2 and 4 when they actually had an antenna on the roof, and many of you who had antenna will remember some that looked like a big loop, and they were a big loop, but if you look closely, the top two trying to find myself, the top two didn't touch, and the bottom two had leads coming down, and that was called a folded dipole. They wanted to have either the wavelength, the whole wavelength, in one loop, but it was too big to put on a single antenna, so they just folded it over, and for magical reasons in magnetism, the wave worked just about as well anyway. So the idea of taking energy out of the air has been around for a long time. For any of you out there to think, well, why can't we just take energy out of the air? We do it all the time, every single day. We've been doing it for years and years and years. It's called radio, and nowadays when you go in with your smart cards and you tap a terminal, what's happening there is a terminal is a radio broadcasting system using frequencies so high and wavelengths so short that the actual antenna can be built right into that little thing on your smart card. You can see it there. That's a microchip right there. There's thousands of circuits going on in there, and it can use the power, the actual energy being radiated by the terminal, because it needs virtually no power at all. Like, it just needs nothing to actually receive a signal and send another signal back. It will capture energy from its own antenna to power itself enough in a kind of memory storage area, just long enough to, it's almost a continual cycle. It doesn't have to worry that its input is going to stop coming because the terminal is there powering it for it. So the idea of pulling energy out of the air is already happening, and what the people out there that think we can just capture it for nothing don't realize is that you can't lift a horse with a 5-year-old. It's not going to happen. There's not enough energy in a little bit of air. And we do things like capture the sun's energy all the time, and we're going to do it more and more with solar panels. We capture, as you know, with solar cells, a particular bandwidth of light, which includes the visible spectrum too, and turn that into electricity. So the sun's free, but it isn't free to capture it. Somebody's got to buy the solar panels. Is it going to be you? Is it going to be the government? I expect in the future, as civilization goes through the decline it's about to and then resurrects itself, there'll be much better integration of structures and power, because the demand for a lot of devices will use a lot less power, fortunately, but we're still going to need lots and lots of power. Especially for things like running cars and buses and trucks and things like that. They consume enormous amounts of power. It's just the way it is. You can't lift an elephant with a 5-year-old. You need lots of power to do it. You got to bring a whole bunch of muscle men. And power, that's just the way it is. And I don't want to get into technical stuff. I'm trying to talk about, and I've yacked on 12 minutes nearly, some ideas for those out there that think you can get free energy out of the air by a paperclip and who knows what. It's been done. It's called a crystal radio. It was done years ago. You don't grasp the basic laws of physics, so you think you've discovered something. Woohoo, you did, but you didn't realize that you don't know enough to know enough. It reminds me of when I'm 73 now. And at age 18, just going on 19, I went directly out of high school into a naval officer school, and then just before, when I was still 19, just before my 20th birthday, a couple of months before, they made me an officer in the Navy, and I became a navigator and then went into submarines. But the previous 3 years before I went into the regular forces, I had been in the reserve Navy. I lived in Hamilton, and fortunately the main reserve base was there, which was to my good fortune in ways I'm not going to bore, with which I won't bore you right now. But one of them, the result of part of this good fortune was that because my Hamilton Home Division officer was a regular forces petty officer, chief petty officer, he could pretty much guarantee me work through the whole summer, which was good news to me as a high school student. So I would have to do my minimum 2 weeks Naval Reserve training, which I volunteered to do. I had to do 2 weeks training every summer. It was part of the deal. But it meant that I could pretty much work, right? Summer holidays were only July and August in those days. There were none of these. I don't know how. Seems like kids have 6 months off these days. But you had July and August that you could have a job, and there was no school involved. So I could be pretty much guaranteed 8 weeks work with the reserves in one way or another. So I'd usually do 4 weeks of training, and then I worked in the headquarters, the reserve headquarters, just doing office work for little old ladies who just loved me. Me and my buddy John, we both did it. So one of the things that happened to me, this is one of my long-winded stories, old man story. So I'm 18 years old, and I know I'm pretty sure I'm going to be going into the regular forces. Well, I guess I'm 17 going in 18, because otherwise I would have been in the regular forces. So I'm still 17 and waiting to be 18 so I can go into the regular forces in the fall, which I'm going to. And maybe I was 18. Who knows? It doesn't matter. So one of my jobs, and this is what this whole long-winded story is about, that I got to do for I did it for at least 2 weeks. And then my buddy John, we switched jobs. Maybe I got to do it for 4 weeks. Seemed like a long time. It was great fun. Maybe it was a month I got to do it. There were 2 gate vessels stationed in Hamilton for training of the brand new reserves who had never been on a ship before, but I'm in my 3rd year of being reserve, and I've already did my stint. I did it on a frigate a couple of years earlier, HMCS Lausanne. So that was where I got drunk the first time too, going ashore. Anyhow, that was when I was 16, but now I'm older, 18, going on 18 or something. And so I had a job for, I believe it was 4 weeks, as being part of the crew of one of the gate vessels, which were just giant tugboats which during the Second World War would haul big anti-submarine nets back and forth across harbors. And there were 2 of them stationed in Hamilton, and we'd go out together and with the young trainees, and I was basically part of the ship's crew for my 4 weeks. And I was a signalman, so I was the communications department. So I didn't have anybody above me but the captain, because I was the radio person. And I would spend my days from basically 9 to 5 sort of a thing, more or less, sitting up in the radio shack on the bridge of this little ship, and there was about 4 officers. The captain, if I remember right, was a reserve lieutenant, as was, I think, the executive officer, and there would have been a training officer and a petty chief. There was other people, but the main crew would have been the officers, me, communications, an engineering officer type, and maybe half a dozen engineering types to run the engines and stuff, and a cook. He was regular force. They were all the engineering, and well, some of the engineering people were reserves too because they were doing training. So the cook was regular forces, as far as I know. He taught me to eat dry bread before we're going into rough weather if I thought seasickness might be an issue, and it worked great. So the long story of all this is that about science and knowing and stuff, and even though I was very young, I had a subscription to Scientific American. I didn't understand much of anything that was in it, but I had a serious interest in science. I was going to be a physicist, and I never did quite do that. But the captain came up to the bridge one day, and he saw me reading my Scientific American, because he just looked in the window of the radio shack when he was on his way up to the bridge, and he said something like, "A little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing," and something along that line. I think he was impressed that a kid like me was reading Scientific American. He was just trying to be funny. But we got along really great, the captain and I. But yeah, it's like you don't know what you don't know. And even today I learned new things. But now I know a lot about physics, and I have a theory about how the speed of light is set by the electron, which is a monopole. It repels other electrons. We know it does. That means it's a monopole. It's also magnetic somehow. By spinning, it generates magnetic waves, and I have a theory about that too. So I'm really into physics, and I just want all you folks that somehow thinks there's free energy, just imagine your boss coming to you and saying, "Well, what else you doing anyway? Your work should just be free, you know. Why should I pay you? Why should your work be free?" So that's sort of the way the old style kings work. They realize that they own the land, or the pharaohs, or whoever, and they own the land anyway, and since I own everything, you're just going to have to give me a goodly part of everything that you grow, because you couldn't grow it unless I let you, and I own it, so you owe me. And now we try to barter a bit better, and I don't know how well we're doing it. But there is no free anything. If you think there is, you just don't understand the science. And, basic physics isn't all that hard. In high school physics, you'll begin studying physics by studying what's called ballistics and flotation or buoyancy. You'll usually start with ballistics first, and that goes back to Galileo and Newton and how things fall and how fast they fall and everything we know everything about gravity except what it is. I say gravity is push, the push of the electrons, because they're monopoles, it's not pull, that everything's trying to get away from everything else, and the math works out the same, but Butchie Poo says gravity is push, not pull, caused by the electron. So and even magnetism. I'm not going to go. I want to wrap this up because I've yacked a lot today. I know a lot about physics, and there was a point to all this which I seem to have completely lost somewhere along the line. ADHD will do that to you. So Butchie Poo is going to. I was going to say, physics. If you learn the basic fundamentals of physics, it's called ballistics. And Isaac Newton gave us most of those laws. And even Isaac Newton, long before Einstein, realized that all measurements are relative and everything happens within a relative field, because we can't know absolute motion and absolute time. So that's a whole other subject, but even Newton was he was all concerned about relativity too, and he just stated, well, don't worry about it, it's not really going to affect you, and for the most matter it won't, because everything you think is happening here seems to be happening here, even though we're flying through space at really high speed. We're flying through space. This is your captain speaking. We are approaching, now we're a steady 230 kilometers per second. We are on course for the center of the Milky Way. We'll be there long after you're dead, so don't fret it. I'd start worrying about the asteroids first and the coming famines. The famines are coming, folks. Gotta fix this greenhouse effect real quick. Bye from Butch. I gotta push down here. There we go. Bye.